The autumn sun was setting over Pine Ridge Heights as two high school students headed home from their usual after-school activities. The sister, a debate team captain, had just finished leading a practice session for an upcoming state championship. Her younger brother, fresh from basketball practice, still had his gym bag slung over his shoulder in the passenger seat. They chatted about their day, with the familiar ease of siblings who'd grown up sharing car rides and secrets. The sister adjusted her rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of flashing lights behind them. Her heart skipped a beat, even though she knew she'd been driving carefully, exactly 5 miles under the speed limit, just as their parents had always taught them. "Stay calm," she told her brother, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "Remember what Mom and Dad taught us." Their parents had prepared them for moments like this, though they'd hoped their children would never need those lessons. The police cruiser had been following them for 3 blocks now, close enough that she could see 2 officers inside. Her brother pulled out his phone, quietly opening a video recording app, another lesson from their parents. The sister signaled and pulled over smoothly, positioning their car under a street light. She placed her hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, just as she'd been taught. Her brother's hands rested visible on his knees. The dome light was already on, illuminating the car's interior. These weren't just casual actions, they were survival skills passed down from one generation to the next. 2 officers approached, one on each side of the car. Their hands rested near their weapons, a detail that made the teenagers' hearts race despite their outward calm. The sister's window was already rolled down, letting in the cool evening air and the sound of crickets starting their nightly chorus. "License and registration," the first officer demanded, his flashlight beam sweeping across their faces, then around the car's interior. The sister responded with practiced politeness, her voice clear and steady. "Sir, may I ask why we're being pulled over?" "This vehicle matches a description," came the curt reply, the flashlight beam lingering on their school bags in the backseat. The sister knew their family's car. A well-maintained blue sedan with a state legislative parking permit clearly visible on the windshield matched no reasonable description of anything suspicious. Her brother kept recording, his phone angled carefully to capture both officers. He remembered to keep his other hand visible, fighting the urge to reach for his student government ID that would prove they were just teenagers heading home from school. The second officer circled the car, peering through windows with unnecessary intensity. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. The sister's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her phone, pressing the emergency speed dial their mother had set up. The call connected silently in her pocket as she responded, "Sir, I'm a minor, and I'd like to wait for my parents before stepping out. They're both on their way." Her voice carried the strength of someone who knew their rights, but also the tremor of someone who knew rights didn't always matter. Through her pocket, the phone was transmitting everything to their parents. Their father was already leaving an important legislative session, and their mother was stepping out of her law office, both racing to reach their children. The officers exchanged looks, their postures shifting as they noted the legislative permit again, this time more carefully. But they didn't back down. Instead, they called for backup, transforming a simple traffic stop into something that would soon spark a citywide conversation about power, privilege, and the possibility of change. As red and blue lights from approaching patrol cars began to reflect off nearby windows, the sister squeezed her brother's hand briefly. Neither spoke, but both knew this moment would change more than just their evening plans. In the growing darkness, they sat perfectly still, their phones recording, waiting for their parents to arrive and for their story to begin. The state capitol building buzzed with activity as usual, but everything changed when that phone call came through. In the middle of discussing a crucial education bill, the senator's phone vibrated in his pocket. He normally never answered calls during sessions, but something made him glance at the screen. His daughter's number flashed, and his heart knew before his mind did that something was wrong. Stepping out into the marble hallway, he pressed the phone to his ear. The sounds that came through made his blood run cold, his children's voices, steady but frightened, and the commanding tones of police officers. Years of political training kept his voice level as he spoke to his daughter, but his hands were already gathering his things, his feet carrying him toward the exit. "Stay on the line," he told her, his voice echoing in the empty corridor. "Your mother and I are coming." He could hear his son's voice in the background, reciting their car's registration number to the officers. The pride he felt at his children's composure mixed with a deep, burning anger that they had to be this prepared, this practiced for moments like these. Meanwhile, across town, their mother was already in motion. The distinguished civil rights attorney had just wrapped up a conference call when her emergency phone line lit up. She didn't need to hear the details. The special ringtone told her everything. Within seconds, she was up from her desk, briefcase in hand, her legal assistant already calling ahead to cancel her afternoon appointments. In the car, she switched to her Bluetooth, listening to the live recording from her daughter's phone. Her trained ear picked up every legal misstep the officers were making, each violation of protocol, every subtle escalation in their tone. But right now, she wasn't thinking like a lawyer. She was thinking like a mother whose children were surrounded by flashing lights and drawn weapons. Back at the traffic stop, more patrol cars had arrived, their lights painting the peaceful suburban street in surreal colors. Neighbors were starting to peek out of their windows, some coming out onto their porches with phones raised. The sisters' original recording had already been uploaded to a secure cloud drive. Another family safety protocol that felt too much like preparing for an inevitable storm. The brother kept his own recording going, capturing the growing number of officers, the license plates of each patrol car, the exact words of every command given. His debate team skills helped him stay analytical, even as his heart pounded against his ribs. He noted times, badge numbers, the way each new arrival changed the dynamic of the situation. Their father arrived first, his official vehicle pulling up at the same time as local news vans, alerted by neighbors who recognized the state legislative plates on the teenager's car. He stepped out, every inch the dignified public servant, but with thunder in his eyes. The officer's demeanor shifted subtly as they recognized him, but they didn't stand down. Moments later, their mother's car pulled up. She emerged like a force of nature, tablet in hand, already pulling up relevant case law and department regulations. The sight of both parents approaching from different directions made some of the officers take a step back, finally reading the situation for what it was, a massive mistake that was about to become a major incident. But neither parent rushed to confront the officers. Instead, they moved calmly to their children's car, positioning themselves where the cameras, both news and police, could capture everything. Their mother's voice carried clearly in the evening air as she began to document each violation, each overreach, each moment that would soon become evidence. Their father stood by the driver's side window, one hand resting protectively on the car's roof, his presence both a shield and a statement. The crowd of onlookers had grown, phones raised, capturing what everyone knew was becoming more than just another traffic stop. This was turning into a moment that would force their city to face some uncomfortable truths. As red and blue lights continued to flash, the family stood their ground, four figures united against a system that had just made a revealing mistake. The children remained in their car, still recording, still following protocol, but now with the strength of their parents behind them. In the growing crowd, phones pinged as social media began to light up with the story. By morning, everyone would know what happened on this quiet suburban street, and the changes it would spark were only beginning. The morning after the incident, the family's living room transformed into a command center. Laptops hummed, phones buzzed constantly, and papers covered every surface. The teenagers' recordings had gone viral overnight, spreading across social media like wildfire. But this family wasn't interested in viral fame. They were building a case. Their mother sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by stacks of police reports. Her reading glasses perched on her nose as she compared the officer's official statement with the reality captured on video. "Listen to this," she called out to her husband, who was pacing nearby on a call with fellow legislators. "They claim they had a report of a suspicious vehicle matching our description, but there's nothing in the system, not a single call." The kids sat at the dining table, still in their pajamas, reviewing their own footage. The sisters' debate team skills came in handy as she created a detailed timeline of events. Her brother, usually quiet, spoke up. "Look at the timestamp when the second patrol car arrived," he pointed out. "They called for backup before even checking our IDs." A knock at the door made everyone pause. It was a young journalist from the local news station, the same one who'd arrived at the scene last night. But she wasn't there for just another sound bite. In her hand, she held a USB drive with 6 months' worth of police stop data she'd been investigating. The pattern it revealed was impossible to ignore. Over the past 6 months, she explained, spreading printouts across the coffee table, there have been 37 similar stops in this area. Young drivers, no violations, just matching descriptions that never seem to exist in official reports. The family leaned in, seeing their personal experience transform into part of a bigger picture. The father's phone kept buzzing with messages from other parents sharing similar stories. A teacher wrote about her son being stopped 3 times in 1 month. A doctor described her daughter's anxiety about driving alone. A local pastor detailed how his youth group members mapped out safe routes to avoid certain patrolled areas. By midday, their mother's law office had set up a secure website where people could submit their own experiences. The responses flooded in so fast they had to upgrade the server. Each story added another piece to the puzzle, revealing a pattern that couldn't be explained away as isolated incidents. The kids' school friends started sharing their own family stories, stories they'd never told before because they seemed normal, just part of growing up. The brothers' basketball teammates described the different routes they took home from practice, avoiding certain streets where stops were common. The sisters' debate partners shared recordings of their own encounters, stored safely but never shared until now. Around dinner time, a retired police officer reached out through a mutual friend. His hands shook as he reviewed the footage in their living room. "This isn't what we were trained for," he said quietly. "Someone's giving orders that aren't in any official playbook." He offered to help, sharing internal documents that showed recent changes in patrol patterns and unofficial target areas that perfectly matched where most stops occurred. The local police department's public affairs office released a statement calling the incident under review, but the family's evidence was already telling the real story. Their mother worked late into the night, combining video footage, data points, and testimony into a document that would soon shake the entire department. The teenagers surprised everyone with their technical skills, creating a digital map marking every reported incident. Red dots clustered around certain neighborhoods, schools, and community centers, forming a pattern that couldn't be coincidental. Their father brought this map to a late-night meeting with city council members, watching their faces as they realized the scope of what they were seeing. As midnight approached, the family gathered around their kitchen island, sharing a late dinner of reheated pizza. They were tired but determined. The sister's phone kept lighting up with supportive messages from her debate team, who'd already organized a student committee to gather more evidence. The brothers' basketball coach called, offering to reschedule practices so players could attend upcoming community meetings. Looking at her children, their mother saw not victims but leaders. They'd taken a frightening experience and turned it into a catalyst for change. Their father put down his phone for the first time that day, smiling at his family. "You know," he said, "sometimes the biggest changes start with one small moment of truth." The investigation was just beginning, but something bigger was already happening. A community was waking up, finding its voice, and coming together to demand answers. And it all started with 2 brave teenagers who knew their rights and weren't afraid to stand up for them. The high school auditorium buzzed with energy 1 week after the incident. Students, parents, and community members packed the space, with people standing along the walls. The senator's children stood at the podium, no longer nervous teenagers but young leaders ready to spark change. "We're not here to point fingers," the sister began, her debate training evident in her clear, confident voice. "We're here to create solutions." Behind her, a large screen displayed a newly developed app, its interface simple but powerful. Her brother stepped forward, holding up his phone to demonstrate. "Every time you're stopped, the app records your location, time, and details," he explained. "It automatically uploads everything to a secure server, so even if your phone is taken, the data is safe." The audience leaned forward, phones already out, ready to download what would become their community's new tool for accountability. In the front row, a group of computer science students beamed with pride. They'd spent sleepless nights helping develop the app, fueled by pizza and determination. Their teacher had given them extra credit, calling it real-world application of technology for social change. A sophomore raised her hand, voice shaking slightly. "Last month, I was stopped 3 times in 1 week driving to my piano lessons. I thought I was alone." Around her, heads nodded in recognition. She wasn't alone anymore. The app would make sure no one felt alone again. The basketball team arrived straight from practice, still in their jerseys. They'd been among the first to test the app, mapping out their daily routes to school and practice. Their coach stood with them, clipboard replaced by a tablet showing hot spots where his players reported frequent stops. Parents shared stories too. A nurse described her midnight drives home from work, counting police cars following her. A delivery driver mapped the routes he avoided, streets where being the wrong color in the wrong car could mean a long night of routine checks. But something different was happening now. Instead of fear and frustration, there was purpose. The youth organizations had transformed anxiety into action. Every documented stop, every recorded interaction became data, evidence that couldn't be ignored or explained away. Local tech companies noticed. A software engineer offered server space. A cybersecurity firm volunteered to protect the data. College students created tutorials in multiple languages, ensuring everyone in the community could use the app effectively. The sister pulled up a live map on the screen. Red dots showed recent stops, forming patterns that told a story no one could deny. But there were also green dots, places where officers had helped community members, positive interactions documented with the same care as the negative ones. "We're not against the police," she explained. "We're for accountability." In the back of the auditorium, a young officer watched quietly. He'd grown up in this neighborhood, graduated from this same high school. After the presentation, he approached the siblings. "I became a cop to protect people," he said softly. "Maybe this app can help us remember that's what we're supposed to do." Community meetings became strategy sessions. Church basements and community centers filled with people learning to use the app, sharing experiences, and building networks of support. Grandparents who'd never used a smartphone sat beside tech-savvy teens, learning to document their stories. The brothers' basketball teammates started a Safe Rides program. If someone felt uncomfortable driving alone, they could request a buddy through the app. Soon, other sports teams joined in. The debate team created a Know Your Rights video series, breaking down complex legal concepts into simple, clear information. Local businesses stepped up too. Coffee shops offered free Wi-Fi for app users to upload their data. Auto repair shops provided free camera installations for cars. A local printing company made wallet cards with QR codes linking to the app download. By month's end, the app had over 10,000 users. Each documented interaction added to a growing database that would become impossible to ignore. But more importantly, it had given the community something powerful. Proof that they weren't imagining things, weren't alone, and weren't powerless. The sister stood at her bedroom window one evening, watching cars pass on the street below. Her phone buzzed with another notification, someone documenting an interaction across town. She smiled, remembering how a frightening traffic stop had transformed into a movement. Sometimes change didn't come from shouting louder, but from gathering evidence quietly, persistently, until the truth became undeniable. The downtown courthouse steps were packed with people on a crisp morning as the senator's wife, the distinguished civil rights attorney, prepared to file the landmark lawsuit. But this wasn't just another legal case, this was about changing the system itself. Her children stood beside her, no longer victims but advocates for change. Inside her briefcase lay 3 months of meticulously gathered evidence, thousands of documented stops through the community app, hundreds of personal testimonies, data analysis showing patterns that couldn't be explained by chance, maps revealing how certain neighborhoods faced disproportionate targeting. Each page told part of a story that could no longer be ignored. "This isn't about punishment," she explained to reporters, her voice carrying across the crowd. "This is about transformation." Behind her, community members held up their phones, showing the app that had become their tool for change. The red dots on the map had become impossible to explain away as coincidence or justified police work. Meanwhile, across town at the state capitol, her husband was presenting a new bill. The legislative chamber was unusually full, with many young faces in the gallery. The brother and sister sat in the front row, watching their father turn their experience into action. His voice filled the chamber as he shared real stories gathered through their app, stories that moved beyond statistics to show the human cost of unchecked power. "Every dot on this map," he said, pointing to the projection behind him, "is a member of our community. a student trying to get to school, a parent heading to work, a teenager driving home from sports practice. Each dot represents a moment when they'd felt less safe in their own neighborhood. Back at the high school, students gathered in the library during lunch, watching both events live stream on their phones. The app development team had grown from a handful of computer science students to a full club. They'd added new features based on user feedback, emergency contacts, real-time alerts for areas with increased police activity, and a support network for people who'd been stopped. The city council chambers became the next battleground. Community members lined up to speak, armed with data from the app. A grandmother described how her grandsons mapped safe routes to school. A business owner shared footage of customers being stopped repeatedly in his parking lot. A teacher showed how her students' attendance dropped after increased police presence in their neighborhood. But something unexpected happened too. Good police officers began speaking up. They shared their own concerns about unofficial quotas and pressure to make stops in certain areas. Some even downloaded the app themselves, using it to document when they saw colleagues crossing lines. The police chief faced tough questions at a public hearing. The wall behind him displayed a live map from the community app, each new dot adding to the evidence as he spoke. He couldn't dismiss these incidents as isolated anymore. The pattern was clear, documented, and undeniable. Local media dug deeper, finding similar patterns in other cities. The Teenagers app had sparked a movement that was spreading. Other communities reached out, asking to implement the same system. The sister spent her weekends on video calls, teaching other young people how to start their own monitoring programs. The lawsuit moved forward, but it wasn't just about legal action anymore. The community had created something bigger, a way to hold power accountable through technology and unity. The Brothers basketball team now had players from the Police Youth League joining their games. Small changes, building bridges even as the bigger battle continued. At a community dinner in the church basement, people shared stories of recent police encounters. But now these stories had a different ending. Officers asking about the app, some even apologizing for past behavior. A few had started attending community meetings, not in uniform, but as neighbors wanting to be part of the solution. The attorney worked late into the night, reviewing new evidence. Her children popped into her office with leftovers from dinner, finding her surrounded by papers and glowing screens. "Look at this," she said, showing them a graph. Reports of aggressive stops had dropped by 30% since the app launched. It wasn't victory yet, but it was proof that sunlight really was the best disinfectant. The senator stood at his office window, watching protests give way to problem-solving sessions. Young people with laptops sat beside experienced activists, turning anger into algorithms, frustration into frameworks for change. His kids had shown him that sometimes the quietest revolutions were the most effective ones. Change was coming, not through violence or vandalism, but through the patient gathering of evidence, the steady building of bridges, and the unstoppable power of community united by technology and truth. The police academy classroom looked different today. Instead of the usual rows of chairs facing forward, they were arranged in a circle. Officers sat shoulder to shoulder with community members, many still wearing their work clothes after rushing from their day jobs. The senator's children were there too, no longer afraid but ready to share their story. "We're not here to point fingers," the sister began, her voice steady. "We're here to build something new." She clicked to the first slide of their presentation, showing the familiar map of documented police stops. But now, there was something different. Green dots were starting to outnumber the red ones. The brother stood up next, holding up his phone. "This app isn't just about catching bad behavior anymore," he explained. "It's about highlighting the good too." He showed how community members had started documenting positive interactions with police, officers helping change flat tires, playing basketball with kids, attending neighborhood events. An older officer raised his hand. "I've been on the force for 20 years, he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Nobody ever taught us how to be part of a community. We just learned how to police it." Around the room, heads nodded, both officers and residents recognizing the truth in his words. The new training program wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of dry lectures about policies and procedures, it started with listening. Officers spent time in local businesses, not patrolling but just talking. They attended high school sports games out of uniform, cheering alongside parents. They learned the names of the kids at the corner store, the elderly couple who walked their dog every morning, the night shift workers heading home at dawn. The brothers' basketball team hosted a special game, officers versus students. The gym echoed with laughter as cops tried to keep up with teenagers. Afterward, they shared pizza and stories, discovering they had more in common than they thought. One officer even signed up to help coach the junior league. The police chief made changes too. Body cameras weren't just for recording incidents anymore, they became tools for learning. Officers would review their interactions, not looking for violations but for opportunities to do better. The community app data helped identify areas where more training was needed, where tensions could be eased before they escalated. Local businesses joined the effort. The coffee shop near the station started hosting monthly Coffee with Cops meetings where residents could share concerns in a casual setting. The auto repair shop offered free safety checks, with officers helping to change headlights and fix minor issues instead of writing tickets. The Sisters debate team took on a new project, creating scenarios for police training. They acted out different situations, helping officers understand how young people felt during traffic stops. Some scenarios were based on real experiences shared through the app, turning painful memories into teaching tools. Technology played a big part in the changes. The app now included a feature where officers could log their community engagement hours. Some started competing to see who could rack up the most positive interactions. The data showed something remarkable. In areas where officers spent more time building relationships, reports of problematic stops dropped dramatically. At the community center, a new program paired rookie officers with local teenagers for mentoring, but not in the way you might expect. The teens taught the officers about their neighborhood, their culture, their daily lives. Officers learned to see the community through young eyes, understanding why some actions that seemed routine to them felt threatening to others. The training went both ways. Community members learned about the challenges officers faced, the split-second decisions they had to make, the weight of responsibility they carried. Understanding grew slowly, but it grew stronger for being rooted in real experiences and honest dialogue. One evening, a year after the incident that started it all, the family sat in their living room reviewing the latest data. The sister pointed to a chart showing how response times had improved since officers started really knowing their patrol areas. The brother shared stories from kids who used to hide from police but now waved hello. Their mother, the civil rights attorney, smiled as she added another positive incident report to the database. The lawsuit had ended not with punishment, but with a commitment to change, and more importantly, with a roadmap for how to make that change real. Their father, looking through the window at kids playing street basketball with an off-duty officer, reflected on how far they'd come. Sometimes, he said quietly, the best way to fix a broken system isn't to tear it down, but to transform it from the inside out. The transformation wasn't perfect. Change never is. But every green dot on the map, every positive interaction logged in the app, every new connection made between officers and residents proved that a different kind of policing was possible. It just took a community brave enough to demand it and willing to help build it. The university auditorium was packed to the rafters on a bright spring morning. Students from across the country had gathered for the first National Youth Leadership Conference on community policing. On stage, the sister and brother who had started it all were no longer scared teenagers but confident college students, ready to share their story once again. A year ago, the sister began, "We were just two kids trying to get home from school." She paused, letting the words sink in. Today, we're part of a movement that's changing how communities and police work together across America. Behind her, the screen showed their app's impact, now active in over 50 cities, with more joining every month. Their hometown had become a model for others to follow. The data told the story. Traffic stops down by 60%, community trust up by 75%, and police response times improved by nearly half. But the real changes couldn't be measured in numbers alone. The brothers stepped forward, sharing pictures from their community's transformation. Kids playing basketball with officers who knew them by name. Elderly residents feeling safe enough to take evening walks again. Young drivers no longer gripping their steering wheels in fear when they saw flashing lights in their rearview mirrors. The app was just the beginning, he explained, showing how it had evolved. Now it didn't just track police interactions, it connected communities. Need a jump start for your car? The app could find a nearby officer or community volunteer. Planning a block party? Local police would help with safety plans, then join in the celebration. In the audience, police chiefs from different cities took notes. They'd seen the statistics, but seeing the human stories behind the numbers made it real. One chief whispered to another, "This could work in our town too." They weren't just talking about the app, they were talking about the whole approach to community-centered policing. Back in their hometown, the changes had taken root deep and strong. The Police Academy's training program, developed with community input, had become a national standard. New officers learned about cultural awareness not from textbooks, but from spending time with local families, attending community events, and really getting to know the people they served. Their father, the senator, had helped pass legislation requiring similar programs statewide. But more importantly, he'd shown other lawmakers that change was possible without compromising safety. Other states were following suit, adapting the model to fit their own communities. Their mother's law practice had shifted too. Instead of just fighting cases in court, she now spent more time helping other communities set up their own monitoring programs. She'd created a network of lawyers who worked with police departments on prevention rather than punishment, building bridges instead of filing lawsuits. The high school where it all began had its own success story. The computer club that helped develop the app had grown into a full-fledged technology program. Students learned coding by creating tools for community improvement. Their projects went beyond police monitoring to tackle other local issues: food deserts, public transportation gaps, education access. At graduation ceremonies across town, something new started happening. Along with family members, students invited officers who'd become mentors and friends. The same police badges that once caused fear now represented trusted allies in their success. The app's latest version included a feature that surprised everyone: officer commendations submitted by community members. These weren't just for dramatic rescues or solving major crimes. They celebrated the small moments that built trust. An officer who sat with a lost child until their parents were found, another who helped a teen change a flat tire in the rain, a third who showed up at a student's art show just because they promised they would. One evening, the family gathered for dinner, just like they had on the night of the incident that started everything. But now their phones buzzed with different kinds of notifications: success stories from other cities implementing their program, messages from young people inspired to create change in their own communities, updates about positive police-community interactions happening right in their neighborhood. The sister looked at her old debate team trophy, remembering how she used to practice arguments. Now she was teaching others how to turn confrontation into conversation. The brother's basketball jersey hung on the wall beside a photo of his team playing against local officers, both sides smiling, genuinely enjoying each other's company. Their parents shared proud looks across the table. What had started as a frightening traffic stop had grown into something none of them could have imagined. Their children hadn't just overcome an incident of profiling. They'd helped create a new model for community safety that was spreading across the country. As the sun set outside their window, cast golden light across their familiar street, a police car drove by slowly. The officer inside waved to the kids playing hopscotch on the sidewalk. The children waved back, their smiles natural and unafraid. This was the real legacy, not just an app or a program or even a movement, but a fundamental change in how people saw each other. Fear had given way to understanding, suspicion to trust, and a single moment of injustice had transformed into a lifetime of positive change.